Okay, so for our second day, we will be chatting about evolving threat modeling for agility and business value. Our panelists for today are Jack Freund, VisibleRisk, Simone Curzi, Microsoft, Hasan Yasar, Carnegie Mellon University, Arun, Prabhakar, and Altaz Valani from Security Compass. Gentlemen, I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you very much, Raquel. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Thank you as well to this entire panel for being a part of this. I guess before we kind of move forward, it might make sense to go and maybe do a brief introduction so folks know who you are, and then we can kick off the presentation from there. I'll just go based on what I'm seeing on my screen here. So, Hasan, you...
Sure. And I'm Hasan Yasar, and thanks for the opportunity, Altaz, and happy to be part of this great session. I'm a technical director at the Software Engineering Institute as part of Carnegie Mellon University. So helping or organizing the various DevSecOps and Agile activities and helping the DoD programs mainly. And also I'm a adjunct faculty member at the Carnegie Mellon University teaching software security courses and DevOps courses as well. And then helping for organizations that mainly how we get the security throughout the software lifecycle from beginning to end. That's kind of the work I've been working.
Wonderful. Thank you. Simone?
Everyone, I'm Simone Curzi, Principal Consultant from Microsoft Services. I have been in Microsoft for quite some time, 20 years now, and I have covered different roles, but essentially I am a security expert. My expertise are around Microsoft Security Development Lifecycle, threat modeling, and I'm also the author of a threat modeling tool called the Threats Manager Studio.
Wonderful. Arun?
Hello, everyone. I'm Arun, Senior Consultant with Security Compass. I love to work on the shift-left security activities, and of course, that includes threat modeling. And yes, for today, we have an interesting topic on evolving threat modeling, and excited to share with you all about our research.
Fantastic. That's great. And Jack?
Hi, I'm Jack Freund. I am the head of methodology for VisibleRisk. I've been doing cyber risk quantification for about 15 years, and I'm the co-author of the book on the FAIR standard that measures CRQ.
Wonderful, fantastic. And folks, Altaz here, and I'm the Insights Research Director at Security Compass. So why don't we go ahead and kick this off? I will share my screen. Let's get moving on our presentation. So we've got PowerPoint. Give me a moment. All right. So what we're really here to talk about today is about the evolving threat modeling paradigm. And this is really aimed at agility and business value. Some of the things that we've seen in some of this research that we did. So the panel here spent a considerable amount of time exploring this, and we're here to share with you what we've discovered, what we found as well. We have other communities. And so here's an opportunity for everybody else to benefit from the work that we've done as well. So once again, these are our panelists. At the end of this presentation, we will have a LinkedIn profile with any one of us. Feel free, more than happy to connect with you and have conversations, collaborate, talk about some things that we're seeing as well. Let's start off by looking at the threat modeling context. So the context has shifted. If we look at the threat vectors, we've gone from understanding the threat vectors to the where it's evolving continually and it's accelerating. Architecturally, we've gone from monolithic applications to distributed applications, and you may even include when we extend distributed systems that we've got today that are kind of short-lived components. And from a flow control perspective, what we used to be able to more predictably ascertain what's the flow of information of these systems that we develop, to the point now where there's so many different ways to go in and interact and have information flowing that it's difficult to know exactly which would be the one way to see how. For example, and from a methodology perspective, we've gone from waterfall to agile, and we can even extend that further to talk about swarming, things like that, where there's a cross-functional group focus on secure software. So as we look at that shift and we overlay that with threat modeling, we start to see the emergence of challenges around tools really not doing what they were intended for, all the way to trying to use a particular blind acceptance of unknown system components, and using across different domains like security and risk and compliance and some of these other. So I'm just going to open this up at this point, and I'm going to start with you, Simone. In terms of the challenges and the context that we see, do you have any thoughts or any comments? Simone, you're there? Okay, let me go back and let's see if we can what we're seeing here. Oh, Simone is not there. Sorry, I had my screen there with the PowerPoint. Hi, Simone, you there? Okay, let's flip over, and maybe Hasan, if you can offer your thoughts on this, then what we'll do is we'll come back and we'll carry on with Simone.
Sure. So when I look at that evolving things that we discussed about the three perspective, and so current landscape has complexity problem and connectivity problem, extensibility problem, as we laid out for architecture as an example. It's becoming more and more complex now. So at early stage, in early days, like 20, 30 years ago, like in a classical way, we know the system from end to end because we were building from scratch, and it's more monolithic. Now we're looking for multiple components, multiple architecture modules, multiple systems are connected to each other. So each of them is giving a different type of view of perspective to look at what are the possible risks are in that application that we are connecting. Let's say we have a basic web application that we may have, and this basic web application still has more than 25 layers behind the scene. Comparing to what we have done as the basic code at the past, like we're writing one line of code as a C++, maybe something. Now saying a hello world in a web application has a 25 layer dependencies behind the scene, which is creating more about complexity, how we can analyze the risk, how we can analyze the threat for each of the elements of this complex environments. Now, another things that we see as the problem is we have more about the business value thinking now. Because if you look at really how the DevOps movement started, how Agile started, it's all responding to the business need. It's all about the business value. Because the root of the reaction, we would like to go fast. Fast means get the market needs. What the market needs, having a value for the business that we would like to bring. Whatever we do, whatever organization that we are in, we're always looking for how can we get best of the quick services for our customers, our users, as quick as possible. So that type of as quick as possible makes us more agile thinking. When we go fast and fast and fast, we ignore the security. By intentionally, by lack of knowledge, by limitation, we can call out all these things we discussed shortly, but we kind of ignore the security elements. We're not able to pace the same value that have the organization to get that, but we missed that the security requirements as we go. That became a bottleneck for us is the complexity. When it became a bottleneck for us, and then organizations are choosing what I have to do now. Do I have to get market right away? Think about security after the fact. That's what's happening. Because we're going to go fast and quick, get in the market, deliver something with the result of DevOps thinking, result of Agile thinking. Now, how are we going to patch that software? It's too late sometimes to go back and patch the software, which is the complexity problem is evolving again.
Interesting. Simone, in terms of your thoughts about the threat modeling, the context, and some of the challenges, any thoughts or opinions on that?
Oops.
Oh, sorry, you're mute. Oh, okay, let's move on. That's okay. Arun, do you have some thoughts?
Sure. So let me talk like a typical practitioner here, having done threat modeling in the past, done few mistakes, and now like writing this paper to mark them down as the challenges here. So one of the first things that we have mentioned over here is like, the use of the diagrams in the threat model. Now we got to understand that that's not certainly a scalable way, and it should be only an optional element in the whole threat modeling process. And the reason, because we are all moving to the DevOps world, which Hasan just mentioned. And in the world of DevOps, there is a lot of interaction that we may have to do with a lot of teams, be it with the architects, the developers, or be it at with the administrators in the post-deployment phases. Now, when such kind of interactions happen, and when there are continuous releases that are being planned, a diagram that is put once is not certainly going to help you from a scalability front. It's certainly not going to help us in the long run. So when such kind of things are going to be the order of the day, like the continuous releases, continuous integrations, and many scenarios that we keep frequently experiencing, the diagrams are certainly not going to be an optimum way to stay along with the other teams in releasing the product fast and going to the market soon. So that's one of the important challenges that I see, and the diagram should be an optional element. At the same time, I would also talk about the use of tools. Now, I'm going back to the same point on the DevOps methodology. Now, one of the key points around DevOps is the use of tools. So what happens is like, okay, we got a threat modeling tool. We think like we've got to integrate that with the pipeline. And we think that is going to automate the threat modeling process. Not at all. It is not at all going to help us in any kind of an automation. In fact, when we are using any kind of a tool, it's going to give us a whole lot of generic threats. I mean to say, like many of the threat modeling tools today lack the specificity. You're going to get to see the same recommendations, same set of probably threats that are going to be given for applications from different portfolios, applications having different kind of technology backgrounds. So the security professional will have to end up putting a lot of time in segregating the threats which are really not going to be applicable. So if you're going for the tools and you think like tools are going to automate the threat modeling process, that's a big no, I would say. So, I mean, this is like a long list of things, the challenges, but then I just try to emphasize two of them.
Jack, do you have your thoughts on this?
Threat modeling in general is a great input into an overall risk management framework. And I think what is important about threat modeling is it helps to add some certainty around an ever-increasing amount of cyber risk complexity. I mean, the amount of change that is happening and the way that we're building products and services for organizations is ever increasing. And the amount of complexity of building multi-cloud solutions and apps and standalone browser-based interfaces and all these kind of things together really are complicated. And then you add a speed of change element to this, characterized, I think, last year by how all of a sudden we went from zero to zero trust in a matter of a few weeks. We had to all of a sudden have everybody working from home, and our threat landscape expanded significantly. So all of these complexities really are challenging to organizations to make better risk management decisions. So trying to categorize them, trying to write them down and show them and say, here's the 50 things that can go wrong, these are the top 10 we need to worry about, is a great input into a larger risk management function.
We talked about how this is going to become increasingly more cross-functional. We'll start to unpack that a little bit. These are sort of the underlying things that are beginning to creep up as we kind of look at, within our own spheres, what is happening around the threat modeling space. Simone, would love to hear from you. I hope we can get your I'm so sorry. We can't hear.
It is basically a typical threat modeling concept we are dealing right now. We planned it before, we exercised before, and we put the mitigation strategy. Still, we're having some issues. So we're going to continue. Simone.
For some reason, we still can't hear you. I'm not sure why. Yeah, I apologize. So it was all working before. Sorry about that. So in terms of just looking at where the challenge, looking at things evolving, I think it makes sense if we take a look now, start to consider, this idea of a quality threat model. So I'm going to stay away from a presentation mode with the, we have a sense of and it's still, so just in terms of the quality threat model, on the left-hand side of the screen here, we see the alignment of lean processes, which are fully integrated, and just that in a presentation. But it's about using multiple tools to achieve threat modeling, integrating with various SDLC tools, focusing on auditing each tool category, and ensuring that we've got this threat modeling system that is keeping in line with where DevSecOps is going. Let's put the right-hand side, the maturity levels off. But just speaking about this idea of lean process and full integration, Hasan, I know you do a lot of work with your teams in this space. Can you talk a little bit about threat modeling in the context of an entirely integrated pipeline that cuts across multiple?
Great. So that goes back to the first topic that we discussed. Because of complexity, because of lean thinking, it's really forcing us to carry out the threat modeling through the life cycle. So what means life cycle, when we look at from end to end, and each of the system that we are building, each of the component that we are building, there's a specific security requirement should be in it. And how we get the security requirement, that's going to go back to the threat modeling thing again. So before that, I'm going to share a couple of examples what's happening right now. As the typical DevSecOps environment that we are building as the pipeline, we always look at just a static analysis as an example. We say, so yes, let's get it, put the static analysis into our pipeline, and let the code is going to be analyzed, and we're adding a dynamic analysis after the static analysis. So once we build is ready. So based on we're relying on two elements. One is, let's get to look at the code based on non-CWS. Let's look at the application based on the CVEs as two examples. But we always miss the problem, which one is important to us? Which one is important with respect to the CWS and CVEs that we are looking for it? So that's going to give some hierarchical thinking as a high risk and high, low, and risk categorization for the specific application we are looking for it. And there is a disconnected thinking rate. Even the pipeline is great, pipeline is automatically done, but where is the threat modeling in this concept? How are we going to set which one is high priority for me? Which one is creating an impact for my organization that I'm building an application that has a value on it? So when we write any agile stories and the lean thinking, we always writing a value for the stories. We say, what is the value that we're writing that story is giving an organizational thing or delivering a capabilities. When we have a release that we release the program and application, we have a value for release planning as well. But we often ignore the security element as the value in our planning tools, in our testing tools. When it comes to just that static analysis, Altaz, we miss that connectivities. It is becoming more about having a number of findings as the security defects. And when it comes to prioritization, how are we going to do prioritization? That's the current thing right now. What we would like to do with the evolving threat modeling concept, let's try to integrate into our system lifecycle that we might be using a DevSecOps practice, we might be using some other different agile techniques. Whatever we do, software engineering perspective, let's try to blend our threat modeling thinking into the lifecycle by planning, by designing, by integrating. But should be a living things. It's not going to be a one set of threat modeling, guys. So many examples, we are doing the perfect threat modeling in application context, but we're not able to go back and revise based on new technology we might be using, based on new changes we are using. So technically, our agile mindset is more about the lose a couple architecture, but we're not able to carry out the threat modeling as the same way how we treat application architecture, which is another one. When we say integrating the SDLC, we have to look at how are we doing well in terms of the planning for any work we do in agile story map, storyboard, this concept, or the Scrum. How are we can do the threat modeling in the same level of work we do our planning and exercise? So we can ask the question ourselves, what is enough for the static analysis? What is the level of the conformance in terms of the high risk or medium? We can say, yes, we are done. We can go to the next one. What is the level? What is investment for analyzing? That's a really $1 million question. Everybody's struggling on what is the value for static analysis. So we can tie into that. And then other things, since we are using more than maybe multiple static analysis tools, and now we are struggling which one is false positive? How are we going to look at that? Which is another goes back to the correlation pieces, that we don't know what the threat that we are dealing. We don't know the possible mitigation that we already said at the beginning, right? And then we can do the proper analysis or the addressing the known vulnerability that we discover from the both static analysis tools, so we can verify this concept. So when I say integration, should be a life cycle perspective. Again, and then when we say DevSecOps, again, there's an operational pieces. How are we going to make sure that there's a new threat comes into the picture? We just discussed before the panel, threat is keep increasing. Depends on what we deliver to our customer, depends on what the landscape that we are in. As Jack said at the beginning, now we're in a cloud environment. So we're using some cloud environment. Now the new threat pop up with the new settings in the cloud environment. Are we ready to address those new threats? Our process is ready to address and put into the life cycle that we are working on it. How much we are quick and agile of adding the threat model into our existing posture and addressing some operation on it as well, Altaz.
Yeah, this is really interesting. You see, we've gone from doing development, and then we've gone to DevOps, which is trying to integrate dev and ops, and we're trying to make sure that from a flow perspective, that we've got things that are flowing as seamlessly as possible between these two teams. And now with DevSecOps, it's like, you know, going across the enterprise now. And so it's not just about creating a fluid flow across just a couple of teams, but it's multiple teams, potentially multiple tools now. And so if one were to look at this, the problem around threat modeling, you know, you talked, Hasan, about ensuring that we've got operations people being able to contribute towards threat modeling. We've got security people who will contribute towards threat modeling. We've got developers as well. And so now we start to tip this where it isn't just in the domain or the realm of one team to go in there and conduct threat modeling. And not only that, but it isn't just about creating one artifact that works just in that context, but it's something that now should be applicable across the board, and anybody should be able to go and do that. And it's in a sense, it goes beyond just socializing threat modeling, and we're democratizing threat modeling over time. And I'd like to consider, Jack, from your perspective, you know, looking at this as a business, someone who's on the business side, a chief risk officer, or somebody who needs to fund this, maybe a CFO, you know, and they're looking at this thing and saying, we need to understand what our threats are and how resilient are we against the mitigations for those threats. How does all of this, from a threat modeling perspective, tie upwards into risk? I mean, is there a risk assessment tie-in, or can you talk and unpack that for us a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the most important thing to understand about the perspective of chief risk officers and board directors is typically at a more aggregated categorical level. Mm-hmm. So they probably think about cybersecurity as a holistic entity. Cybersecurity risk is a thing. So in answering questions such as how much cybersecurity risk do we have, you have to follow a very structured decomposition process to say, okay, so when you say cybersecurity risk, what do you mean? And this typically involves decomposing that category down into things that are meaningful for this organization. And that's an important way to make sure that you're connecting the technological things at the bottom that threat modeling helps us identify very well to the big picture things at the top. Board directors will know what ransomware is because it's in the news all day long, recently, especially over this past year. So they understand those things broadly. But when you get much more detailed level things where people are trying to, you know, subvert the way an application is developed in order to make it do something it's not designed to do, those things are a little more esoteric to them. So it helps, I think, to be able to use exemplars at lower levels to represent categories as you go up. So when you start thinking about these different types of perspective that threat modeling might do at this granular level, like we're talking about here, assigning those categories and rolling them up into a risk management process is the best way to do that, so that when somebody says, well, what do you mean when you say application subversion? Well, here's an example of 4 or 5 things that we think can go wrong and that we think we should prioritize in our fixing phases. This makes it very clear, two things very, very clear. The first is that we as technologists are hyper connected to the business things that we think are important. this will gain their attention and make sure that you get the resources necessary to help fix these things. And then the second is it also gives those executives that are making these decisions based upon this input the right level of input to understand two things. One, what are the things I need to worry about? And two, are we doing all the things necessary? And I say that very broadly on purpose because this is the sort of language that they speak in. Are we doing all the things necessary to ensure that our applications are secure? And your answer can be, well, sometimes yes, sometimes no. Here's a list of things that we think are broken. Here's a list of things we think that need to be fixed immediately. And here's a list of things we think that can be postponed. Yeah, interesting. And Arun, you've done some stuff on the threat modeling side. I mean, you've done security dealing specifically with the applications themselves. Can you describe the experience of trying to move towards cross-functionality and becoming lean, and some of the challenges that emerge from that, right? What from your experience do you think we need to be aware of around this?
Sure. So there are two things that I can think through. One is like from the perspective of linking the different threads, and the other is from the perspective of process transformation. First of all, from the perspective of linking the different threads, we actually first of all come up with only the technical threads, which is totally wrong. We also got to think through many of the process issues. We got to think through many of the business-related elements, or maybe even some of the domain-related aspects. Now, when we have identified a thread, we got to link the thread to all this business domain, or the businesses or the domain or the process and stuff like that. The second thing is we've got to link these threads from the perspective of the different risk personas, just like Jack mentioned right now, the risk officers or the IS auditors. So we got to link the outcome of the threat modeling to the different risk personas that are in the enterprises. And the second thing that I can probably think through is from the perspective of the process transformation, where especially from for many of the organizations which are marching in the path of DevOps, they have to link the principles of DevSecOps to the threat modeling, right? So we got to think through threat modeling from the perspective of continuous releases. We got to think through threat modeling from knowledge management perspective. So if at all we think through threat modeling and how it applies to continuous releases, that is when we got to integrate it with different tools like your Jiras or Rallies or whatever it is. So those will actually help in a collaborative, or it will help in the collaboration. For example, like the program managers would get to know what risks exist. The executives would get to know the status of the risk overall from the dashboards and all this. And probably even the developers would get to know instantly, okay, what threats exist and can I proactively address all of them in the code itself right now. And the second thing is the knowledge management. We all think okay, threat modeling is carried out in the design phases or in the left side of the life cycle. But what we also got to do is get the feedback from some of the tools that are used in the fag end of the life cycle. For example, the SIEM or the SOC tools, those kind of tools will actually help us understand the different threat patterns and the new and emerging issues that are being learned by all these attackers and the general public. So the SIEM or the SOC tools will actually help us understand these new threat vectors, and that will become an input to the threat modeling tool. So basically integrating this tool with a program management tool or an issue tracker, or along with the SAST and DAST tools will actually, it's not just about integrating them with multiple tools, but it is also bringing a lot of DevSecOps values like the continuous release management, or the continuous integration, or the knowledge management and things like this. So from a process management or a process transformation perspective, threat modeling will have to be thought through, and it is certainly going to help us map with all these values of the DevSecOps, which I just said.
Yeah, interesting. And so we're seeing, at least in the circles that I'm having conversations with people, this idea of producing reference architectures to facilitate exactly this kind of movement. How do we go from something that was traditionally housed within a single domain or even just a single phase of the life cycle, as Hasan was talking about, but stretching that now out to other areas as well, so that when we talk about things like risk, there's a translation of that business risk into specific activities that are related to mitigations against threats that come up. And so when you take a look at other inputs, for example, asset management can contribute towards the value of that particular asset, whether the asset is an application, it could be a piece of data, it could be any asset. And how do we go in there and, based on the importance of that asset, conduct something that is important insofar as the business is looking at the investments that need to be made around mitigations. So it's that kind of thinking that begins to unfold. And as we were going through this exercise, we found that there's this continuum. There will be some organizations that will just be starting on this journey, and there will be some organizations that are well on their journey. It's not that one is good or one is bad. That's okay. The goal from a security community perspective is to highlight that there exists a continuum, and we need to start thinking about ways to expand the way we think about security so that it isn't just in the domain of the security experts, so to speak, but it includes other perspectives. And that's where we landed on the right-hand side with these various maturity levels. So we have a level 1 to 4. And starting with level 1, it was really about teams that are just beginning the journey of threat modeling. So doing this over a whiteboard, as an example, looking at how we might go in and consider based on the expertise of these individuals, and then moving from there to a level 2, which is about looking at a more focused approach on how we might integrate this with the business process, as an example. And then moving from there to level 3, about aligning this with what's important for the business, but not just that, looking also at starting to integrate threat modeling across different tools now. And finally getting to a point where we've essentially got this set of practices, we've got a knowledge base that multiple stakeholders are now contributing towards. And so insofar as we've got multiple levels of risk, the lens that we look at risk from within the organization, the knowledge base has the ability to collect and at the same time aggregate this information. So Jack, again, you're looking at this from a risk point of view, and we kind of landed at this knowledge base that exists and moves us away from one single way of doing threat modeling. Whether it happens to be like a stride-based approach or something that's, just one way of doing things, to something that is focused on some, an approach that now includes multiple perspectives. Your thoughts on that? Does that confirm what you're seeing from a risk perspective?
Absolutely. I think it's important to recognize that everyone's on their own security journey on a path to goodness. So what I liked about what we did here was we laid out this entry-level way for people to begin doing this so that they don't have to rely on or have as a prerequisite the purchase of automation tools, which are critical for large-scale systems, but it also doesn't hurt to begin just sort of thinking about it in a whiteboarding session with others that have security in the forefront and say, okay, what can go wrong and what can we design out to make sure that these things don't happen? I think that's important. And this just goes back to what I was saying earlier about the different layers of thinking about these things. Even at this lower level, finding these things, identifying them, and then attaching them to threat actor categories. These are, in other words, these are the types of attacks that you would find nation-state groups perpetrating. Do we need to worry about these? Are these high priority for our organization? What's our business profile? All of these things, communicating them well, and including people from business and second and third line risk functions to be able to say, here's what we're thinking about. Does this mesh with what you're thinking? It brings more of the organization together into this threat modeling process. Even though it's a highly technical thing, it raises these issues to them so that they can better understand it.
Hasan, I know you deal with some very large scale initiatives, and threat modeling needs to be built into that. And given your emphasis on DevOps and DevSecOps, we're now starting to talk about continuous everything at this point, right? It started off with continuous integration, continuous deployment, continuous delivery. Now it's continuous risk, continuous compliance, continuous security. I mean, what does that mean for threat modeling? Are you seeing that threat modeling needs to kind of come out of just a single way of doing things to a more holistic approach across different phases and across different business units even?
That is absolutely, I agree with you, Altaz. And I'm just going to pull up with what Simone, Jack said, and also Arun said. I keep thinking Simone too. I wish he was here too. So when we look at the artifacts that Jack said clearly, we need to communicate. We need to build up the artifacts requiring to talk with our manager, our organization structure, whoever the stakeholders are. So what artifacts means actual artifacts is what we are doing and how we are doing it. Like there is an architectural changes that we are working. There is a requirement changes we are working on it. There is a new attack vectors keep changing from operational side. To achieve this dynamic changes, it is requiring the good communication, as Jack said. How can we communicate with the people? It is requiring common shareable infrastructures. It is requiring to understand the common vocabularies. It's understanding the common business domain. Like if I am looking for a specific risk that I would like to address it, and who's going to analyze the risk for me? There's a value on it. So we analyze that. But to see what are the technical problems may arise and related to the risk that we analyze it. So there is actually a connection between business risks and technical risk. So we, as an engineer, we focus more about the technical side. We're kind of deciding by ourselves what are the technical risks are. But when we look at the technical risk, it's more about the impact of the business risk that we are working on. So Jack's teams are working in that great space and analyzing technical business risk. So in the bigger scale, if we are using the DevOps or any type of software delivery environment with automated fashion, now how can we address that? We discuss about the complexity, connectivity, extensibility problem as we laid out at the first slide. It is requiring to have a common understanding and common communication with all the stakeholders. When all the stakeholders are, when we have like a level 1 as an example, we have to really see what architecture we are working on. Have a whiteboarding. Let's start to build up our architecture on a feature base. How are we doing the agile-ish or the Scrum or the Kanban, whatever the technology is, the practice we are using in our daily routine, and think about the similar way on the threat modeling. Let's say, what are the basic architecture we are working, because it's going to evolve. When we say the level 1, we're not expecting that you're just going to continue whiteboard, but let's start. How are we doing the basic storyboard as quick example? In the storyboard, we just basically sketching out, here's my potential working software environment or software that I'm building. How are we sketching out this potential software we are building? That's the same thing for the threat modeling, which is level 1. It's like, see that? We're trying to integrate the threat model in the level of the developer, because this is the basically foundational communication mechanisms. That's been the same page. End of the developer are working to build a component, right? So when how are we sketching out the UI, how are we sketching out the storyboard or the intent of the working software or the value, let's think about the threat modeling level 1. Then we can add more into the journey, so because we cannot get everything done, because it's going to get evolved better. Like I usually say, we're going to start from the sprint 0, like beginning. Sprint 0 means you're just understanding the domain. Once you understand your domain, once you understand what you're working on, you will get better out of it. So now you understand your business, which is level 2. You have an MVP you're building, your threat model as an MVP, because you're collecting what artifacts are you generating from your pipeline, and based on the risk, based on the mitigation that you have. And now you're helping with your organization, because as Jack said clearly, we need to get the buy-in from everybody in the organization. How are you going to get the buy-in? You got to share something with them. What the something means is an artifacts. What the something means are, here is the data that I have been collected. Here is my static analysis result. Here is my track vector. Here is my mitigation. We can generate this data and then get more into. So start from the basic level and try to evolve and all that. So if you're going to go to like a level 3 as an example, will align the business prioritization, we cannot jump to right away level 3 without having a basic diagram or the basic whiteboarding sessions. You cannot really jump right away, complete everything, because you don't know your technical architecture yet. How are we going to do threat modeling if you don't know your technical architecture yet? Because it's evolving. Right? So it is requiring us go back and re-evaluate again. That's what we're kind of, as a team, we agreed on it. We have to continuously addressing the threat modeling based on the risk prioritization we have an organization we are in.
Yeah.
Based on new concept, our process and practices should help us to go back and re-evaluate again. All this level will help us to use the tools. Let's say we have so many things we listed in the paper about what type of tools, how are we going to integrate the threat modeling in that tool? The question we're asking ourselves, yes, I am in the level 1. I would like to have a basic version of the whiteboarding exercise. What that means to me in the issue tracking system that I'm using it. What that means to me for any ISM tool I'm using it. What that means to me for about any static analysis that I'm using it. What that means for threat models. Like start from that questions and ask ourselves and change of way of thinking. If I am using any type of planning tools, what I'm expecting of that tool is going to give me a level 1, which is basic, and then level 2, level 3 and up. And we can have more artifact creation, because as the artifact is important because we need some evidence. Like evidence is going to tell us, here's what I'm generating. What evidence means, which is a report. Like I may be creating some diagram, I may be creating some system detail, reusable stack libraries. Really, we didn't get this evidence as a result of this tool. We can go back and fit into our threat models. We can evolve that. So another things I would like to call out here, Altaz, that's kind of important to overall audience. Security is the living things. And I have been teaching the courses in my graduate level as well. I see the problem. It is not taught everywhere and current knowledge, even though all of us, we don't, because we're learning new things. Like who knows that something will happen tomorrow, another threat may arise, maybe another techniques that we're going to hear that. So it's really requiring be up to date, but resilient. So going back to the knowledge pieces, as an organization, we have to build up the knowledge. How are we going to build up the knowledge? By using this report evidence generation, learning what the new techniques, learning about the new mitigation, learning about the new attack patterns, learning about new technologies, as Jack said at the beginning, as same as Arun. Now we have a cloud environment. Are we ready? Are we ready for the Kubernetes that we are using it? If something happens for the Docker container that we have in terms of the breach happen, are we ready to go back and evaluate the new container base that we build it? Are we ready for the process-wise? Are we ready for the evolving that component so we get add into it? So it's basically we're creating a lot of information through the pipeline and spreading that information with other stakeholders. What we're educating our risk team, we're educating our engineers, we're educating our dev team, we're educating, most important, our C-level folks, our managers, because end of the day, somebody has to decide, right? We can decide how much money we're allocating that.
Yeah.
End of the day, it's the dollar. So who's going to decide the dollar? Like you have to show some evidence to the leadership, to finance folks, and show what is my return of investments. That's a very basic question.
Absolutely. So I think I'd just like to kind of piggyback off that a little bit. So, Jack, this is directed at you. We go in, and this is a typical scenario. We'll conduct a threat modeling exercise. And from that threat modeling exercise, we will derive out certain mitigations. I mean, the goal of threat modeling is ultimately to identify the threats and to come up and suggest what some mitigations are going to be. So a typical CISO report, for example, could be we found X number of vulnerabilities, or we were able to go in and mitigate these threats, as an example. And this gets put for the executive team in the business. And there's a massive disconnect here. Do you have any advice for the audience in trying to sort of cross this gap? When we talk about things like vulnerabilities and we talk about red, yellow, green, this is how well we're doing, how we exist, it doesn't seem to resonate, and it's frustrating CISOs. But it's also frustrating the business because they're like, I can't do anything with this data. Can you talk a little bit about that? And because I think that backs into how should we be conducting our threat modeling in a way that aligns with the business? Sorry, you're mute.
Sorry. Yeah, that's a good point. And it's something that a lot of people suffer with, not just in vulnerability management, but in other parts of the organization and security in particular. Expressing things in stoplight charts, red, yellow, green is helpful. It helps to prioritize things that are important and say, I think this is more important than that. And a lot of the work that I have done in cyber risk quantification, that decomposition and layering of things I talked about earlier is helpful to connect it to a narrative sentence that describes who's doing something, what's happening, and then what's the impact. But that's the first step. After that, then you have to put some dollars and cents around that. And it usually comes down to identifying business impact. How many customer transactions are we not going to be able to process because this thing is happening? How many and how often do we have to respond to regulatory inquiry because this thing is now broken, and so on and so forth. And this is the most critical part of working in risk management, especially for cybersecurity, is realizing that you don't really have strong understanding of how a business operates, and then finding people in your organization that do. Because I guarantee you there's somebody whose entire job it is understanding, if we do X, how many more customers are we going to get, or how many customers are we going to lose? So being able to connect to those parts of the organization are very, very helpful. And there's probably, if not amazingly quantified data around this, there's rough back of the envelope data that's more than perfect for the types of statistical analysis you can do with a standard like OpenFair, which leverages Monte Carlo simulations. A quick story about this. I was working and doing some consulting with a government agency, and they were struggling to figure out the impact of this thing breaking. I don't know how we're going to figure this out. There's nobody doing this. And I did a little research, just a quick Google search actually, and I found one department in this federal agency that their entire function was determining the economic impact of all of the programs that they were doing. So all I had to do was point this one part of the group to the other part of the group they didn't know existed, and they were able to find out and attach to these things and say, here's what we think economic impact looks like if this goes out. That exists in your organization too. You just have to spend some time and develop the relationships with those parts of the company who are focused on making money like that, and they'll know how cash flow works. They'll know how customer preference works. And that can help you leverage data sets, nascent though they may be, to add into a risk assessment that you can attach threat modeling data to.
Yeah, interesting. So what we're seeing is essentially the emergence now of really three vectors. On the one hand, we absolutely have to think about business value. And so we talked earlier about things like value streams and talking about the systems and the information that needs to be integrated across these systems. But now we're also evolving into looking at how do we look at the capabilities. It isn't just about modeling capability per se, but it is also related to knowledge management. It is also related to other things like compliance, for example. It's related to other aspects of the business. And so we identify these additional capabilities, and we have to map these against the different stakeholders based on which level of the organization they are responsible and accountable for. So someone who's at a very high level as an executive has coarse-grained information that they're going to need, but threat modeling can still be useful for them. It's just the information presented to them is presented in a very different way. It's more aggregate information that kind of rolls up. And then as we go down, we'll get, program managers and directors. And then we've got actual practitioners that are, boots on ground. They've got to go in and they've got to be the ones generating this information based on their daily activities. And all of this now kind of works together. And so the concept of threat modeling being, like a stride-based approach, which is diagrammatic inside the design phase, is essentially evolving into something that is now cross-functional across the enterprise. Threat modeling becomes critical now, in a sense, because it essentially provides the necessary information to feed into risk, which is so important for the business to understand. But the nuances around what threat modeling looks like is evolving. So Arun, you've been kind of quiet for a bit. I'd like to afford you an opportunity to give your thoughts and opinions around the discussion so far as well.
Yeah. So one of the things which we have been continuously talking about is like the different maturity levels. So how is that, like someone looking at this one, the maturity level of threat modeling, how to really know where we are. So that's exactly where we have talked about the different the self-audit questions, and of course the different evidence levels. So we have asked different questions at different maturity levels for all the tool categories to understand if we have really got into that maturity level or not. And of course, like, how do I evaluate myself? That is exactly where the evidence comes into picture, and it tells you, like, hey, if you are asking yourself this question, then you should have had these kind of answers with you for the threat modeling practice that you practice in your organization. So the audit level and the evidence that are there for every maturity level, every tool category, will really help you where you stand. Number one is that, and number two, when we talk about the different tool categories that we are put together, there are about some 15, 16 of them, but all of them emphasize on the process. Hasan rightly mentioned that security is a process, threat modeling is a process. Now, all of the tool categories that we have talked about are not just technical elements or simple security activities that are being practiced throughout the pipeline. They're all process elements, different aspects of quality management, different aspects of the value stream. And there are, of course, some activities which are practiced in different parts of the pipeline. So the maturity level and the tool categories actually focus on the different process elements, and they are not supposed to be considered as, okay, it's just a security activity or something. And the final thing that I would say is, like, we have addressed basically two sets of categories. One is like the strategic elements, and the other one is like, the objective elements, I would say. Strategically, we just talked about some of the quality management, value stream mapping, and stuff like that. So all these are going to tell the threat modelers, to shift their mindset and not to see that as a simple technical activity. It's basically a tool category that actually helps you culturally shift and shift your mindset in practicing the threat models. And secondly, there are objective elements. If you see, like, we have totally got into the concept of how threat modeling can be practiced in the pipeline, threat modeling as a code, to simply put it.
Interesting. And I think what I'd like to do at this is just share my screen here and let people know that we do in fact have this available for people to have. It's freely available. It's the actual paper that we put out about evolving threat modeling for agility and business value. And to give you some idea of what we've described in here, what are some of the different phases of threat modeling? We even went through and talked about some of the anti-patterns and described it in much more detail than we could possibly do in just a simple 1-hour discussion. And then we went forward and started to take a look at what are some of the gaps with the traditional approach that we've seen that we've all been trained on around traditional data flow diagrammatic threat modeling, and the challenges around speed of updating, lack of reusability, focusing on sort of a micro level, and then lack of measured impact, how it integrates with knowledge bases, and so on. And then starting to look at how do we begin to capture risk, and taking a look and seeing where is threat modeling in fact headed. Now, we're not suggesting that we throw away what we're doing. We perceive this as being a natural evolution of threat modeling, given where DevOps, DevSecOps, agility, lean, where these are all headed, and starting to take a look at how do we take the information that typically resides in the threat modeling shield, and trying to see if we can expand that a little bit to include additional people as well. And so looking at this new threat modeling practice that then emerges, and then the maturity, not only looking at the different tool categories and the different maturity levels that we just briefly highlighted in the presentation today, but even going so far as taking a look at what are the related audit questions that are available. Just an example, what's the evidence that you might be able to collect? And taking a look at how you can mature from being a whiteboard team to a team that really has this risk-driven, knowledge-based approach that is more holistic and includes multiple stakeholders. So again, this is all available. Folks can definitely go in and they can download this. Let me go back into the PowerPoint presentation and kind of talk about what are kind of the in terms of landing this and some of the conclusions that come up. So we know that, look at the model that Gartner uses, where we've got this peak of inflated expectations, and then we kind of go through this trough of disillusionment. Threat modeling right now, we believe, is somewhere around the peak of inflated expectations. There's a lot of interest, and we can foresee a point in time where the current approaches that we are using aren't going to scale appropriately. We're not going to be able to go in and share this information readily across different teams. And so we'll start to go down this learning curve here and eventually emerge into something that establishes a set of best practices. So what we've tried to do is take a peek into the future a little bit. It's not radically at the forefront of where threat modeling is today, but it's where we are seeing, even through our experience in dealing with others and talking to others, they are also seeing a similar kind of thing emerging at this point. So Hasan, do you want to talk a little bit about the takeaways and conclusions around maturity levels and where we are in terms of trending around threat modeling?
Yep. So just to wrap up and a couple of things, Altaz, where we are heading it, and we are looking for as the integral part of our security, because we always looking for answer the question, what is the value? I know we haven't talked about the value, but to go back to the cost association, as Jack said, we need to create some data from our environment. We can justify our security requirements. Because usually if you don't have quantified number for security, it is kind of ignored. So we have to really see the value of the security, how we are doing the business value. That's a kind of connection. When we say business value, what that means, what is the cost of not addressing security? That's the question. What is the cost of not addressing the known vulnerabilities? What is the impact for our organization? So threat modeling is going to help us drive that data from our environment, put into the risk associated with the feedback, so we can justify, or we can really give the idea for the cost perspective, so we can allocate enough funding resources. I'm going to open up the one quick notes here, and I have been as a DevSecOps community survey last couple of years, Altaz, that remind me. Developer, we asked that question last 6 years. We said, how do you have enough time to address security in your dev cycle? And do you believe that security is important? So every developer, like more than 90%, they are believing it's important, but they didn't have enough time to address the security because they are not budgeted like that. They don't have budgeted in terms of your functional requirements or whatever requirements they're working on it. So dev team are strongly believing that yes, it's important to me, but they don't have enough time. Why they don't have enough time? Because it's not planned properly. Why they don't have enough time? Because it's not budgeted properly. So we are hoping that integrating the security risk into the risk management, so we can have enough allocation for the dev team, so dev team can put the security. End of the day, developer has to fix that. Developer has to fix, because we're going to teach them, we're going to help them understand, so we can put enough time to address the known vulnerabilities that's going to be impact associated. So that's the reason we said threat model should be integral part of our security risk management, because this is going to give you a vehicle to collect enough evidence and feeding back to the team so we can justify our security requirements. I'm going to stop there and then hand over to the USO. I know it's a long topic.
Wonderful. There's a lot more we can talk about, absolutely. So let's kind of bring this to a land. We've only got a couple of minutes left. Feel free, folks, download the white paper. You can just do a search on Google for Evolving Threat Modeling for Agility. Connect with us, please, please. Feel free. We've got LinkedIn profiles. You're welcome to come in and interact with us. We have a large community of people working on many different kinds of projects. Threat modeling is one aspect of where we see things evolving, and we think it's an important thing to consider going forward. And with that, I think I'd like to bring this to a close. Thank you, everybody on the panel, for participating. Thank you, Simone, if you're able to listen in as well. Sorry you had some technical difficulties. Thank you as well, everybody, for coming in and being a part of our discussion today. Thank you, and have yourself a wonderful rest of the conference.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.